How did humanity survive 1,000 years of filth, wars, plague, and complete madness? And why would the modern world simply not exist without this nightmare?
When people hear the word Middle Ages, most have the same set come to mind. Knights, castles, dirt, plague, bonfires, monks who forbid everything, and peasants dying just because they sneezed unsuccessfully. And honestly, it's not the worst set of associations. But the problem is that the Middle Ages are usually depicted as if after the fall of Rome, Europe simply disappeared for 1,000 years, as if someone turned off civilization, covered it with a cloth and said, "Do not touch until the Renaissance." And then suddenly, bang, boom, and there are already artists, universities, beautiful squares, philosophers in robes, and everyone is so smart as if for 1,000 years before that they were just on pause. But no, everything was much more fun. And by fun, I mean more terrible, because the Middle Ages were not a failure of history, but its wildest survival mode.
And it all started with Rome. In the 2nd century AD, the Roman Empire was like a perfect server. Everything worked, roads were built, taxes were collected, the army held the borders, trade was thriving, water flowed through aqueducts, and people were getting wealthier. And most importantly, everyone was sure it would always be this way.
And this, as history shows, is the first sign of an impending disaster. The 3rd century Rome experienced as if someone had cursed it. Emperors change faster than memes on the internet. One ruled for 22 days, even a trial subscription lasts longer. Then he was killed, and it wasn't considered strange. The army chose the emperor itself, and then a month later thought, nah, this is nonsense, and killed him. The economy was shaky, the borders were cracking, everything inside was rotting, the empire still looked powerful, but inside it was already creaking like an old cart. Then Christianity came, and it completely changed the rules of the game. If before a Roman lived for glory, war, and remembrance, now it was explained to him that the main thing was not that at all, but how he would appear before God after death.
And for many, this became an unexpected turn. Imagine you spent your whole life building your reputation, and then you're told that the real rating will only be revealed after death. And then the Huns appeared on the horizon. These guys didn't build cities, didn't write books, didn't discuss philosophy. They just charged forward with such speed that everyone around started to panic in advance. The Germanic tribes fled into the Roman Empire. Rome let them in, and, as often happens in history, a good idea quickly turned into a disaster. In the year 410, Rome was sacked for the first time in 800 years. For people, it was as if today someone had taken over the entire internet. Absolute panic. In 476, everything finally collapsed. The last emperor was simply removed from the throne. No epic battle, no final boss. A guy just came and said, "That's it, enough sitting."
Thus ended the greatest empire of antiquity. Not in flames, but like a boring dismissal. The West collapsed, cities emptied, trade died, literacy plummeted. If you could read, write, and live to 30, you were already considered a local legend.
And at that moment, the church became the only stable system. While everything was collapsing, monks sat in monasteries and copied books. On essence, civilization was saved by people who voluntarily chose a life without entertainment, women, and normal sleep. True heroes, if you don't think about it too long. In the east, however, Byzantium still held on, and there sat Justinian, who decided, why not take back all of Rome? An ambitious idea, like if someone today decided to restore the USSR, Rome, and Alexander's empire all at once. But he had Belisarius, a war machine. He actually started reclaiming territories, and everything was even going well. And then the plague happened, because history hates it when people have it too good. The Justinian plague killed millions. Cities emptied, trade halted, the army weakened. And then from the south came Islam, and in a few decades, the Arabs took huge territories from Byzantium. Everything Justinian had gathered began to fall apart again, as if history was playing a game of blocks with him and deliberately kicking the table each time.
In the West, Charlemagne appeared. He tried again to unite Europe and almost succeeded. He was crowned emperor. He opened schools, initiated education, and generally seemed like a person who could really fix everything. But after his death, the heirs did what the children of great rulers always do. They started dividing everything like a family wardrobe, and chaos ensued again. Then the Vikings came. This is a whole separate genre of madness. They raided, sailed, traded, explored new lands, and did all of this simultaneously. Imagine a courier, a pirate, and a geographer in one person. Now that's a Viking. They reached Rus, Constantinople, and even America, while Europe was still debating whether it was permissible to eat meat on Friday. To survive, Europe began building castles and invented feudalism. The system is simple. The king gives land to the lords give it to the knights protect everyone, and the peasants feed this entire structure. Being a peasant there is the worst role. It's like playing a game and starting on the highest difficulty without the option to quit. By the 11th century, everything suddenly started to come alive. Harvests were better, cities were growing, trade was bustling. People finally stopped dying every week just from cold and hunger. And then the church was like, great, time for a crusade. And thousands of people actually went because they were told, go to Jerusalem with a sword, your sins will be forgiven. Very powerful marketing. The Crusades were brutal, chaotic, and at times absolutely insane, but they opened up a huge flow of knowledge from the East to Europe.
Mathematics, medicine, philosophy, spices. So yes, sometimes to become smarter, humanity first goes to kill someone. A questionable scheme, but it works. Then universities like Bologna, Paris, Oxford appeared, and students were exactly the same even then, noisy, poor, and convinced that the teacher understands nothing. Some things are truly eternal. And then the Mongols came. And here Europe realized once again that there is always someone scarier. Genghis Khan created a military machine that destroyed everything in its path. The Mongols went through China, Persia, Rus, Poland, Hungary. Their tactics broke armies like dry branches, and when it seemed they would reach all of Europe, they simply left because the Khan died. Sometimes the fate of a continent depends on what happens thousands of kilometers away. But the Mongols did one important thing. They opened a safe Silk Road, and along with goods, the plague came to Europe. This is where the real hell begins.
In the year 1347, ships arrived in Europe with dead people, rats, and fleas. Even then, this should have looked suspicious. But no, they were allowed in, and the plague began to mow down everyone indiscriminately.
In a few years, Europe lost up to half of its population. Imagine that every second person around you just disappears. Yesterday, the neighbor was alive. Today, he is being buried, and tomorrow, the one who buried him is being buried. People went mad, searched for witches, blamed the Jews, whipped themselves, and awaited the end of the world.
To be honest, you can understand them. But the plague unexpectedly broke feudalism. There were few workers and a lot of land, and for the first time, peasants could dictate terms. For the first time in history, a person from below told the system, now it's by my rules. And the system was like, all right. Then there was the 100 Years' War, which lasted 116 years, because mathematics in the Middle Ages was a flexible thing. England and France fought for so long that some generations were literally born into the war, and it was then that it became clear. The era of knights was dying. Archers calmly killed the heavily armored nobility from a distance. Imagine you spent a fortune on armor, trained your whole life, and then a guy with a stick takes you out from 200 meters away. And then Joan of Arc appeared, a 17-year-old girl who said she heard voices, got an army, and actually changed the course of the war. In any other story, this would look like a bad script, but this is reality. And while the north of Europe was fighting to the death, the Renaissance was already beginning in Italy. People were rediscovering antiquity, studying the body, art, philosophy. The Medici invested money in artists, the way people invest in startups today, and suddenly it turned out that art could also bring power. Then came Putin. And castles, which for centuries were symbols of strength, began to crumble from cannons. The feudal lords realized an unpleasant thing: their stone boxes no longer protect them. In 1453, Constantinople fell. The last Rome disappeared. And then, in 1492, Columbus accidentally discovered a new continent while trying to find India. This is probably the most productive mistake in human history. And in 1517, Luther launched the Reformation, split the churches, and that was it. The Middle Ages ended. But here's the thing. It wasn't useless. That's where universities, banks, parliaments, international trade, and the very idea of the state we live in today were born. The Middle Ages were not a pause between Rome and modernity. It was a grinder in which modernity was forged messily, slowly, painfully, with a huge number of strange decisions. And to be honest, humanity hasn't changed that much since then. We just have smartphones instead of swords, deadlines instead of the plague, and Monday morning instead of a castle siege. And the feeling of chaos is the same. And then the world finally sped up. While changes used to take centuries, now everything began to change almost in turbo mode. People discovered new lands, new trade routes, new ways to kill each other, and sometimes new ways of thinking. Europe suddenly stopped being a small world around the Mediterranean Sea and realized that the planet is much bigger than everyone thought. And the funniest thing is that no one was particularly ready for this. You live in a world where your map suddenly becomes outdated after one journey. It's like opening a navigation app and realizing that half the roads don't exist at all.
The age of great geographical discoveries began. Spain and Portugal literally burst into the oceans. Vasco da Gama sails to India. Magellan launches the first circumnavigation, and the world begins to connect not only by land but also by sea on a global scale for the first time.
If before trade went along the Silk Road across half the continent, where you could be robbed, killed, or simply overcharged, now goods could be transported by ships. However, there you could be drowned, killed, or overcharged. In general, there was a choice. And along with this, new empires began to grow. Spain was so overwhelmed with gold from America that they literally experienced inflation from an excess of wealth. It's a unique problem to be too rich, like we have so much gold that money has devalued. Not a bad problem, to be honest. Portugal built a trade network from Africa to Asia. England and France gradually caught up. The world was becoming more interconnected. More money, more wars, more ambitions. And science, meanwhile, also began to awaken. People stopped taking everything on faith. Well, not everything, but the process started. A Copernicus looked at the sky and said, "Don't you find it strange that we think everything revolves around us?" And the church was like, "Very strange question. Please stop." Then Galileo looked through a telescope and said, "No, he's right." And the church was like, "No, you be quiet." This is a classic story. A person discovers the truth and the system first gets angry, and then 100 years later says, "Well, maybe." And here it becomes clear that the Middle Ages ended not because people decided to become smarter. It's just that the world became too big, too complex, and too fast for the old rules. Castles no longer provided safety. The church no longer controlled everything. Kings could no longer just say, "This is mine because my grandfather said so." Now everything was decided by money, technology, knowledge, and of course the fleet. Because if you have ships, you suddenly become very persuasive. But most importantly, all these new times were built on the foundation of the Middle Ages. Without monasteries, books would not have been preserved. Without universities, there would be no scholars. Without merchants, there would be no banks. Without the plague, the old order would not have broken down. Without wars, new states would not have emerged.
It sounds harsh, but history is rarely built from convenient solutions. Usually, it is assembled from disasters, mistakes, and very strange people who somehow decided they could fix everything. And to be honest, this is probably the main lesson of this 1,000 years.
5,000 years! Humanity knows how to survive even when it seems everything is completely broken down. Rome falls, we survive. The plague comes, we survive. The Mongols come, we survive.
Vikings, we survive. The 100 Years' War, still alive. Sometimes it seems that history is just an endless, we'll manage somehow mode. And surprisingly, it works. So the Middle Ages are not a dark hole between antiquity and modernity. It is humanity's longest and craziest attempt to piece the world back together from fragments. And yes, in some places the assembly was very crooked. Somewhere half the population was lost. Somewhere America was accidentally discovered. Somewhere plague-ridden corpses were catapulted into a city. Not the most precise process, but in the end, it still worked. And if after all this it seems to you that times are tough now, just remember that at least your neighbor isn't dragging a plague rat to your doorstep.
Although if you have a cat, there are questions. Formally, the Middle Ages ended, but it seems people didn't even notice. No one woke up one morning in the year 1500 thinking, well, congratulations, now we are in a new era. No, everyone just woke up as usual, went to work. Someone was at war with someone again. Someone was trying not to die from a strange rash. And history quietly turned the page without warning. And honestly, it always does that. But changes were happening so fast that the old rules simply couldn't keep up. Europe began to grow wealthier like never before. Gold, silver, new goods, and new resources flowed from America. And then it suddenly turned out that potatoes, tomatoes, and cocoa would change people's lives more than some kings. Half of Europe lived for centuries without potatoes. Just think about that. They really suffered without fried potatoes with bacon and didn't even know it. But along with wealth came new wars, because humanity, as it turned out, can wage war at any level of development. Now, the wars became even more massive. Gunpowder changed everything completely. If before a knight in expensive armor was almost like a tank, now he could easily be killed by a peasant with a musket who just yesterday was herding cows. This was probably the most frustrating nerve in the history of warfare. You spend 20 years on combat training, and you get taken down by a guy who learned to shoot 3 weeks ago. The world also became truly more dangerous in terms of ideas. Previously, the church kept everything under control. Now people have started arguing and arguing fiercely. Catholics, Protestants, reformers, scientists all suddenly decided they had their own opinions. And as usual, it quickly turned into, let's kill each other and see who's right.
Europe in general used war as a way of conducting discussions for an astonishingly long times. Then the scientific revolution began. People started not just believing but verifying. And this was a shock for the entire old system. Galileo looks through the telescope and says, guys, I have bad news. The Earth is not the center of everything. And everyone is like, are you sure? Because that's very inconvenient information. And then Newton looked at an apple and was like, wait, what if everything doesn't just fall for no reason? Sometimes the greatest discoveries start when you just happen to look up or down at the right moment. And the further it went, the faster everything flew. States became stronger, armies larger, money more important, trade more global. All this new Europe, which would later build colonies, industry, revolutions, and the modern world, grew out of that very Middle Ages, which everyone loves to consider a dark hole. And this is somewhat unfair, because without those dirty, bloody, crazy 1,000 years, there would be nothing at all. No universities, no banks, no science, no states, no laws in the form we are accustomed to. In other words, all of modernity is essentially a very long continuation of the Middle Ages, just with better lighting and Wi-Fi, and that's the main twist of history. We like to think that humanity moves forward beautifully, steadily, logically, but if we look honestly, it's not like that at all. We constantly fall, break everything, argue, start wars, lose entire civilizations, accidentally discover continents, spread the plague through trade routes, and then somehow miraculously put everything back together. And each time we think that now we definitely understand everything. Although this is usually not the case. And if the Middle Ages teach anything, it's that chaos is not the end of history. Sometimes it's just a very inconvenient beginning of something new, very messy, very painful, sometimes with rats, but still a beginning. And perhaps right now, humanity is again living through such a transition.
We'll just understand it, as always, in about 500 years. And the funniest thing is that many problems that seemed purely medieval haven't really disappeared. They've just changed clothes. Back then, people fought over land. Now it's over resources. Back then, they argued about faith. Now it's about ideologies.
Back then, they feared the plague. Now it's new viruses. Back then, they panicked about the end of the world. Now they do it on the internet with Wi-Fi and comments.
Progress, of course, exists, but sometimes it's very superficial. And honestly, a medieval peasant finding themselves in our world would probably be more surprised not by the fact that we fly in airplanes, but that we still manage to create problems for ourselves literally out of thin air. This apparently is our most consistent talent. But this is the whole story of humanity. It's not a tale of endless upward development. It's more like a huge roller coaster that someone assembled without instructions and forgot to tighten half the bolts. Sometimes we go up, sometimes down, sometimes it seems like everything is about to fall apart. But somehow the cart is still moving, and the Middle Ages is the best example of this.
1,000 years in which Europe was literally learning to live anew. Without Rome, without the old system, without clear rules, by feel, through mistakes, through blood, through hunger, through wars that lasted longer than a human lifetime. This is a whole new level of stubbornness. Imagine fighting for so long that your grandson continues a conflict, the reasons for which you no longer really remember. And the most amazing thing is that all of this worked. Not perfectly, very imperfectly. In some places, people were burned for their ideas. In others, they treated everything with bloodletting. Somewhere, they seriously believed that a comet was a sign that it was time to panic. Although, to be honest, some still do that now. But through all this, humanity still carried through knowledge, laws, architecture, trade, and the very idea that society can be rebuilt after any collapse. In essence, the entire history of the Middle Ages is a huge experiment called What Happens If Civilization Collapses, but People Still Don't Give Up? And the answer, as it turned out, is quite unexpected. They will build a new, strange, crooked, sometimes eerie, but functional one.
And perhaps this is the strongest conclusion. History never provides comfortable conditions, never says, "Here, have a calm century. Take a break."
No, it throws you into chaos and watches what you will do, and humanity responds the same way time and again. It argues, disputes, breaks, builds, breaks again, but ultimately moves forwards. Sometimes very slowly, sometimes with plague, sometimes with Vikings at the door, but still forward. So next time you hear the phrase Dark Ages, remember these were not ages of darkness. These were ages where people stubbornly sought light, even if everything around was burning, smelled bad, and the neighbor was trying to steal your goat again. And if you think about it, maybe that's why we're here at all. Because someone 1,000 years ago simply decided not to give up. And perhaps that's the most medieval thing that still remains in us.